the Republican Party's MAGA model for America. People are, the debate is tomorrow night, right? And people are wondering, what is Trump's vision? What is the Republican Party's vision, economically speaking, for the future of America? And they actually have one. It's called the Southern Economic Development Model, or the SEDM. And the Southern Economic Development Model doesn't get a lot of publicity. I mean, mostly you read about it in arcane economics texts and blogs and whatnot. The Economic Policy Institute, EPI, did a deep dive into it, for example, last month, which largely informed my rant today. But there is a very specific vision for America built on the SEDM, the Southern Economic Development Model. It explicitly works to, number one, maintain a permanent economic underclass of people living on the edge of poverty. Number two, to rigidify racial and gender barriers to class mobility to lock in women and people of color. Number three, to provide a low-cost labor force to employers. Four, to prevent unions or any other advocates for workers' rights to function. Five, shift the tax burden to the working poor and what's left of the middle class while keeping taxes on the morbidly rich extremely low. Six, protecting the privileges, power, and wealth of the mostly white and male economic overclass. Seven, ghettoize public education and raise the cost of college to make social and economic mobility impossible. Number eight, empower and subsidize churches to take over public welfare functions like food, housing, and care for indigent people. Nine, allow corporations to increase profits by dumping their waste products into the air and water. 10, subsidize those industries that financially support the political power structure. And number 11, heavily use actual slave labor. Yes, that's the Southern Economic Development Model. And, as I mentioned, the Economic Policy Institute did a deep dive on this last month. There's a link to that in my article today. For example, let's just go through some of this stuff. They love to say that we're keeping wages low to attract business to the states because, a rising tide lifts all boats, quoting or paraphrasing John F. Kennedy. Somehow the only people, though, who own the boats are the investors and the management of these giant corporations, the senior executives. This permanent economic underclass is actually a key to maintaining this system, which has its roots in the old plantation system. This is why Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Tennessee, and South Carolina have no minimum wage. Georgia's is $5.15 an hour, and most other Republican states use the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour and $2.13 an hour for tipped workers. It's no coincidence that 10 out of the 20 Republican states that only use the federal minimum wage are in the Old South. Anti-union or right-to-work for less efforts and laws are another key to the SEDM. These failed unionization effort that we just saw in the Mercedes factory down in Alabama, great example of that. Unions, after all, do a number of things. Number one, they balance the power between management and labor. Number two, they promote higher wages and benefits. Number three, they support workplace and product safety regulations. Number four, they advance racial and gender equality. Number five, they boost social mobility. And number six, historically, they have been the principal instrument, in addition to high income taxes, that have created the modern American middle class. Unionization, though, is antithetical to creating and maintaining a permanent economic underclass, which is why, as EPI notes, union coverage rates stand at 11.2% nationally, but it's 3% in South Carolina, 3.3% in North Carolina, 5.2% in Louisiana, and 5.4% in Texas and Georgia. Unions also make wage theft more difficult, essentially forcing government to defend workers who've been ripped off by their employers. That's why Florida in 2002, under Republican Governor Jeb Bush, disbanded their Department of Labor. There's literally no Department of Labor in the state of Florida. And the Departments of Labor in Alabama, Delaware, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina no longer enforce wage theft laws at all. If you get robbed by your employer, you have no help from those states. Another key is to end regulation of corporate externalities. What is that? Well, it's a fancy word typically for pollution. The cost to a community of having the corporation in that community. Probably the classic example, that's Cancer Alley. Over 200 refineries between West Texas and New Orleans. spewing mind-boggling amounts of poison into the air, 7 to 21 times greater exposure to these air pollutants, producing huge cancer rates all across that southern stretch. And, you know, corporate profits are being made on the backs of these people who are getting cancer. Between 2008 and 2018, for example, the EPI documents how state environmental agencies have been cut. In Texas and Louisiana, they cut them by 35% and 34% respectively. Funding was down by 33% in North Carolina, 32% in Delaware, 20% in Georgia, Tennessee, and 10% in Alabama. To keep income taxes low, they shift the cost of running the state away from income taxes and onto the kind of taxes that are paid by average working people. For example, sales taxes and property taxes. They also increase fees, fines, tolls, traffic fines, permits for home improvements, all these things, driver's license costs, the cost to get a cosmetology license or a barber's license or whatever. All of those things are much, much higher in these red states because that's how they fund their states. Tennessee, for example, gets 56% of the entire state revenue from its sales tax, which means that the billionaires in Tennessee who, don't, as one of the patriotic millionaires told me on this program a couple of years ago, he said, I make 10,000 times more money than you do, but I don't wear 10,000 more pairs of jeans than you do. I don't buy 10,000 more shirts than you do. I don't need 10,000 more cars than you do. Basically, rich people, have what they need, and, so, we're paying those taxes, they're not. It also, another way that they work to keep people basically in poverty is by gutting the educational system and making college very, very expensive. And, we see this, all the time. And the classic example of this is the Republicans suing the Biden administration for trying to end student debt. Perhaps the most important part is gutting the social safety net. They've been complaining about the New Deal and Social Security and Medicare ever since they were passed in the 1930s. And this is why weekly unemployment benefits, for example, are lowest in Mississippi, $235 a week. And, you get only 12 weeks of benefits in Florida, North Carolina, and Kentucky, for example. So, this is what it's all about. And actual slavery. The 13th Amendment says that you can hold slaves as long as they've been convicted of a crime. So out of the 1.2 million people who are in prison in the United States, and that number may be much higher, maybe over 2 million, but that was the documented number that I was able to find, 800,000 of them are being held in slavery. In other words, they're working for free, absolutely free. And, this is their model. Arkansas, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Texas have these commercial for-profit prisons run by private corporations that are profiting from the labor of literally enslaved people, enslaved under the color of law under the 13th Amendment. We have over 600 people per 100,000 in jail in the United States. In Finland and Norway, it's 51. In Canada, it's 88. We have 664 people for every 100,000 in jail. We're the only country in the developed world that allows slavery for people who've been incarcerated.